Presents in the story a symbol. It's a metaphor. And Jesus is a metaphor for the sun. And so boiling it down, Christianity is sun worship based on astrology. Because nobody owns the sun. Africans don't own it. And we don't own the sun. So obviously the sun belongs to God. So it's God's son. And he's the light of the world. Of course the sun's the light of the world. What else lights the world if it's not the sun? And he has 12 helpers. Of course, the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 months of the year. He is our risen Savior. Of course, it rises every morning about 5:30. And the sun is your Savior. If it don't come up, we're dead. So once you start breaking down the symbols in the Old and the New Testament, you begin to see that Christianity is basically astrology and sun worship. But it has been so well hidden and so cleverly disguised. And once you start breaking it down and reading the whole story, it becomes overwhelmingly obvious this is what we're talking about. He has a virgin birth. He's born of a virgin, of course. Virgin birth because one of the constellations of the zodiac is Virgo, Virgo the Virgin. Let me give you an example of how this works. On the first day of summer, the very first day of summer, the sun is as high in the northern hemisphere as it's going to go. It doesn't go any further north. The first day of summer, the sun is as high in the northern hemisphere and it begins to work its way south. And each day it moves 1 degree. And as it moves 1 degree each day, 90 days later, or 90 degrees later, it's halfway down. So now we say that the sun was the Lion King in summer. The Lion King because the sun was in the constellation of Leo, the Lion King from Disney. But then as the sun moves southward, it finally hits Scorpio. So God's son was really hot. He was the Lion King, but now he's falling. So now we call it fall because he's fallen and he's falling south. So it moves into fall in Scorpio. And then when you start looking at how the word S-O-N and S-U-N are interchangeable in Christianity, and God knows there's a lot of information on that. So that basically you boil down Christianity is sun worship, as astrology. Old Testament is astrology, sun worship. Yahweh, as I said, was associated with the sun and the planet Saturn. Let me give you another example about the ancient religions of the world. Moses was a lunar deity. Moses was a leader of the moon cult. This is why in all the paintings and sculpturings in Europe, you always see Moses wearing horns. You ever seen that? Moses wearing horns. It's in the Vatican. It's in all the museums of the world. Why is Moses always pictured with horns? Because Moses was a leader of a lunar cult, the moon worshippers. So at one time the Jews were worshippers of the moon, and that time, a period of time, we call the period of Moses. This is why, and why? It's because the Native Americans, their chiefs wear horns. The Vikings wore horns. Because all of these cultures, Native Americans, Vikings, and the ancient people of the Middle East worshiped the moon. The moon, of course, in the lower quarter was the horns, and this is why they wore horns. In Arabia, there's a high mountain range in Arabia, and at night, from the Egyptian side, the moon comes up in the east, and it comes up from a mountain range. And so the ancient peoples believed that the moon was a god, and it lived in the mountain. And there are religious celebrations of the old man of the mountain, the moon god. And in the ancient Arabic system, the moon god was called Sin, S-I-N. That was his name. The moon god of Arabia was Sin. And a mountain in the ancient language was spelled Ai. So you take the mountain Ai with the god who lived in the mountain, the moon god Sin, and put it together, it becomes Sinai. So you got Moses goes up to Sinai. No, it's Sin Ai, the mountain of the moon god. And this is why Jews have their celebration after sundown, because that's when the moon comes out. They don't have the celebration during the day because that's when the sun's out. So that's the time for Christians to celebrate God's sun. The Jews are worshiping the moon god's sin. I don't intend to, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I'm just trying to tell you where religions come from. Religions have been given to us by the same people who gave us our government, our banks, our educational institutions, our whole entire ruddy system in Western civilization is based on religion, politics, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's just business.
We find that Christianity was in fact nothing more than a Roman story, developed politically.
The reality is, Jesus was the solar deity of the Gnostic Christian sect. And like all other pagan gods, he was a mythical figure. It was the political establishment that sought to historize the Jesus figure for social control. There are numerous historians who lived in and around the Mediterranean, either during or soon after the assumed life of Jesus. How many of these historians document this figure? Not one. However, to be fair, that doesn't mean defenders of the historical Jesus haven't claimed the contrary. 4 historians are typically referenced to justify Jesus' existence. Pliny the Younger, Suetonius, and Tacitus are the first 3. Each one of their entries consists of only a few sentences at best, and only refer to Christus or the Christ, which in fact is not a name but a title. It means the Anointed One. The 4th source is Josephus, and this source has been proven to be a forgery for hundreds of years. Sadly, it is still cited as truth. You would think that a guy who rose from the dead and ascended into heaven for all eyes to see and performed the wealth of miracles acclaimed to him would have made it into the historical record. It didn't, because once the evidence is weighed, there are very high odds that the figure known as Jesus did not even exist. Christianity, along with all other related theologies, is an historical fraud. These religions now serve to detach the species from the natural world, and likewise each other. They support blind submission to authority. They reduce human responsibility to the effect that God controls everything, and in turn awful crimes can be justified in the name of a divine pursuit. And, most critically, it empowers the political establishment who have been using the myth to manipulate and control societies. The religious myth is one of the most powerful devices ever created, and it serves as the psychological soil upon which other myths can flourish. The Bible is nothing more than an astro-theological literary hybrid, just like nearly all religious myths before it. In fact, the aspect of transference of one character's attributes to a new character can be found within the book itself. In the Old Testament, there is the story of Joseph. Joseph was a prototype for Jesus. Joseph was born of a miracle birth. Jesus was born of a miracle birth. Joseph was of 12 brothers. Jesus had 12 disciples. In fact, the Egyptian religion is likely the primary foundational basis for the Judeo-Christian theology. And as far as the 10 Commandments, they are taken outright from spell 125 in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. What the Book of the Dead phrased, "I have not stolen," became "Thou shalt not steal." The main source of this idea comes from Matthew 28:20, where Jesus says, "I will be with you even to the end of the world." However, in the King James Version, "world" is a mistranslation, among many mistranslations. The actual word being used is eon, which means age. I will be with you even to the end of the age, which is true, as Jesus' solar Piscean personification will end when the sun enters the age of Aquarius. The entire concept of end times and the end of the world is a misinterpreted astrological allegory. Let's tell that to the approximately 100 million people in America who believe the end of the world is coming. I think we have all seen the Jesus fish on the back of people's cars. Little do they know what it actually means. It is a pagan astrological symbolism for the sun's kingdom during the age of Pisces.
In the real world, you wouldn't think of doing such a thing, even symbolically. But with the shell game of religion, it's perfectly fine to be a cannibal for Christ. 18,000 children starved to death today. The World Health Organization says over 12 million people will be diagnosed with cancer in 2012. Nations are tearing themselves apart, and the almighty creator of the universe is concerned about whether or not you and I do this. He's gotta go. He's the firstborn. The first offspring of every womb belongs to me, including all the firstborn males of your livestock, whether from herd or flock. All right, so you don't adhere to any of these other commandments, even though they're in the same Bible, mainly in the same book as the reference to homosexuality.
And this was 666. Now, we have to realize that in the modern Greek alphabet, these letters are a little bit different. The chi is represented by a straight X. The Xi is represented by something that is just 3 dashes coming down. And then the sigma looks somewhat like a cross between a Z and an E. So here we have G, Zeus, in the ancient way that the Greeks would have pronounced this. And we also have to realize that in these ancient alphabets they did not use vowels. So without the vowel, that says Jesus or God is Zeus as well.
Monotheism, when it finally came, brought with it a terrible consequence. God is exclusively male, and so to be male is to be like God. And this has coloured attitudes towards women for centuries and centuries. In toppling the goddess from heaven, monotheism disempowered women. The evidence I've presented rocks the foundation of modern monotheism.
A quick search reveals that the shroud is referred to as the sacred symbol, which we are told at the simplest level derives from the Greek and Latin syndon, meaning fine sheet, cloth or winding sheet, and specifically of Middle Eastern origin. Syndon is derived from the moon god Sin. It is therefore like the moon in that it reflects the glory or light of the sun. But the most interesting form came when I stepped even further sideways and looked into medieval uses of the word syndon. What I discovered was not only astounding, but it matched the very concepts I was developing for what the whole Ark Shroud Mary notion meant. It was to Moses that the instructions on how to build the Ark of the Covenant were given. Moses himself as a child was drawn out of a baby ark in Egypt. Well, Moses seems to have had a pretty good relationship with God. And so we find in Exodus, "And God said unto Moses, I am that I am." Am in Old English gives rise to the term to remain. In German and Sanskrit it gives rise to existence. However, God at this stage in the game, in Exodus, is still speaking in plural terms such as we are. And so I wanted to know what the plural version of am was in Old English, and was amazed to discover that it was syndon. So I decided it was time to take a look at the word sin, to see if there could be any clue in the name. The word does in fact come from the root Syriac, meaning to shine, and comes to us as sin via the Babylonian Sinu, for the moon.